Good morning, everyone. Berean Unitarian Universalist Fellowship is a caring and welcoming religious community dedicated to the diversity of thought, social and environmental justice, and peace for all. I'd like to welcome everyone today to our Pride celebration. Pride celebrations are decades old, but 2021 does have some firsts for us. Pride celebration in June, our marches and parades that can trace back to the history of back to 1970. For years, attendees have sported bright clothing, carried rainbow flags, and international symbol of gay pride. First, we have for this year, this is the first Pride logo worn on the MLB field. The San Francisco Giants revealed the Pride-inspired versions of the logo on June 1st, becoming the first Major League Baseball team to incorporate Pride colors in the on-field uniforms, the organization said. First sitting vice president to sit at a Pride parade. Vice President Kamala Harris made history again as she attended the Capitol Pride Washington, D.C. parade on June 12th, making the first sitting U.S. vice president to march in the Pride event. She was joined by her husband, Doug Emhoff. She said, "We need to make sure that our transgender community and our youth are protected." She told the world, we need still protections around employment, housing. There is much more work to do, and we are committed. Then we had the first presidential proclamation to celebrate the queer community by name. President Biden was not the first occupant of the White House to proclaim celebrating LGBT Americans, but he is the first to include the word queer in one, as his recent proclamation naming June 2021 lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer Pride Month. This inclusion of the word is only the latest example. It's exceptionally high-profile one of terms striking evolution over years from a gay slur to a badge of honor. And then we have our first progress Pride flags over federal buildings. On the 2nd of June, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm flew a Progress Pride flag over the department. The Progress Pride flag is a modification of the traditional Pride flag. It adds to our familiar rainbow field the chevrons of black and brown that is meant to represent our LGBTQ people of color, as well as pink and white and light blue meant to represent our transgender and non-binary people. And then the first groups on LGBTQ identity by teen authors. This month, 4 teen authors published their first books on being transgender and non-binary, aiming to help promote conversations and about identity among children and their parents and caregivers. The Gender Cool Project, an online campaign that highlights positive stories about transgender and non-binary people. Worked with the publishers, the kids book about to publish the 3 books, one of which is kids book about being non-binary. And I'm sorry, I just lost my place. But anyway, now we go on to our announcements. Our announcements are on the bottom of our invitation to the service. Does anyone have any other than that? Now Dorothy Long will light the chalice for us.
We light our chalice flame for those who lived their lives in closets of shame, for those who furtively visited the bars where nobody knew your name, for the Stonewall riot and the fierce transgender women who fought, for the plague which takes far too many, too young, too soon. So many gone, so many never lived to see. Out gay kids singing on TV, out gay people serving in the military, marriage equality, families formed by intention. We light our chalice flame for all these and for all our siblings of the rainbow, surviving, living life out in the open with pride. These words from Reverend Lori Gorgas Laban, UU Fellowship, Beaufort, South Carolina.
Thank you, Dorothy. Now, as the words appear on the screen, we'll read our affirmation together. Love is the spirit of this church and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. One thing, it's not a joy or concern, but it's something I forgot to tell you. Reverend Jim wanted me to tell you he will not be able to be at the service today. He's watching his grandchildren. He peeked in a little bit earlier, but he's busy feeding them rocks or something like that. So he won't be able to be with us today. So. And now David Sarra will tell us about welcoming congregation.
Well, first of all, welcome, Patrice. And I want to say you came at the right time because the first Sunday in June, we just elected our board members. So you managed to avoid that perfectly. All right, being a welcoming congregation, some of these words comes from the UUA website, which you can find online by going to UUA Welcoming Congregation. In the 1980s and 90s, when the word welcoming became a code word for lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, the Unitarian Universalist Association launched a welcoming congregation program to help us learn how to undo homophobia and later transphobia in our hearts and minds, our congregations, and our communities. When Buff first became a welcoming congregation, we were expected to begin our services with welcoming words which specifically stated that LGBTQ plus lives mattered. Today, most Unitarian Universalist congregations are recognized as welcoming congregations. The spiritual practice of welcome is a very important one to our faith community. The work of welcome is never done. Welcoming congregations can learn more about how to be truly welcoming to all people by renewing their commitment to the LGBTQ plus community on an annual basis. Each year, Buff follows the 5 practices of being a welcoming congregation. These 5 practices are congregation, which Buff became in 2006, present at least 2 welcoming services, such as this one, each year, recognize 6 welcoming days of observance each year, provide welcoming religious education for both adults and children, and support a welcoming project or LGBTQ plus agency, such as the Out Center. Just as Buff's Racial Justice Discussion Group provides continuing education to inform and enlighten us so that we know more than to just simply say, I'm not racist, and then, of course, to act accordingly. Being a welcoming congregation means we need to continually re-educate ourselves so we don't fall back on simply saying, I'm not homophobic or I'm not transphobic. Just as we need to become anti-racist, we need to become anti-homophobic and anti-transphobic, and we need to be proactive in our community. In that way, Buff can truly become the church for all. Thank you.
Brett, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Now, Katharine will read us a story for all ages, and that'll be followed by some pride means to me statements, and then a history of pride, followed by our special music, Same Love.
A Church for All
by Gayle E. Pittman and pictures by Lori Fournier.
Sunday waking, day is breaking. Let's go to our Church for All. Church bells ringing, joyful noises, choir singing, laughing voices, candles glowing, banners flowing. Come enter our Church for All. Weak and healthy, neat and messy, poor and wealthy, plain and dressy, all embracing, spirit gracing, each one at our Church for All. Bodies wiggling, mommies reading, children giggling, daddies pleading, toddlers wailing, babies wailing. There's room at our Church for All. Hands receiving, hands connecting, hearts believing, hearts accepting. Feel the Spirit? Can you hear it? It's here at our Church for All. The end.
Now it's time for our offering words. This fellowship is the community of ourselves. Its resources are our resources. Its wealth is what we share. As we contribute to the life of this community, we affirm our lives within it. Thank you all for your generosity. And now we move on to our message. Today, coming to us from Andrews University is Stevie Yeagley. He is the Assistant Vice President for Campus and Student Life. Take it away, Steve.
Okay, very good. It's wonderful to be with you. And thank you for the invitation to speak with you during Pride Month about what it means to serve LGBTQ students at a local Christian university. I want to be as transparent as I can in the next few minutes about that journey. And I certainly welcome any questions that you might have at the end of the service in the circle time. But let me start with some context. First, as you may know, Andrews University, located in Berrien Springs, is a private national university affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, Seventh-day Adventists are a conservative, non-affirming religious group with a doctrinal statement that defines marriage as a lifelong heterosexual union. Denominational statements call for both faithfulness to traditional biblical teaching on human sexuality and compassion toward those who are members of the LGBTQ community. On the one hand, the denomination sees same-sex orientation as a manifestation of sin's entrance into the world. The church acknowledges that people do not choose their orientation and yet forbids same-sex sexual activity among its members, which it views as sinful. On the other hand, the church holds that all people, regardless of their sexual orientation, are loved by God. One statement reads, "We do not condone singling out any group for scorn or derision, let alone abuse." The denomination has taken a similar stance regarding gender identity, asking that transgender people be treated with dignity and respect, yet remaining unsupportive of gender-affirming surgery. While these are the church's official, albeit somewhat conflicted stances, there is a broad spectrum of belief among Adventist members. These beliefs range from those insisting that same-sex orientation can and must be changed to those that affirm the sanctity of same-sex marriage. The 2012 independent documentary titled Seventh Gay Adventists highlighted the experiences of church members as they navigated conflicts between their faith and their LGBTQ identity. The film appealed to a greater understanding and acceptance of LGBTQ members within the church. Over the decade or so that has just gone, there has been unprecedented societal shift toward the full inclusion of LGBTQ persons. This change has happened across the social, political, and religious landscape and is particularly pronounced along generational lines. Gallup in 2021 found that 84% of American young people now support same-sex marriage. Pew in 2017 reported that nearly half, 47%, of white evangelical millennials and Gen Xers support same-sex marriage. That's up from 29% in just 2016, and compared to only a quarter of older evangelicals. This shift among young evangelicals has forced Christian colleges and universities to re-examine their relationship with their LGBTQ students. Recent data from Christian colleges and universities reveals that 12% of students identify as LGBTQ+, and nearly 1/3, 30%, of students describe experiencing some amount of non-heterosexual attraction or experience. For Andrews University, it all began with LGBTQ students wanting to break the silence and become visible on campus. In 2014, they held a storytelling session with several hundred people in attendance. While it was received well in many quarters, among our most conservative constituents and board members, giving any voice or visibility to these students was unacceptable. LGBTQ students were not allowed to form an official student organization. So they created a social group that met every week off campus. All for One, as they called themselves, met in the home of a supportive faculty member. They soon began to network with other unofficial groups at other Adventist colleges and universities across North America. Meanwhile, ours to increasing contact with LGBTQ students. They shared their concerns and requests with us. They brought reports of harassment and microaggressions on campus and in the classroom, and began to trust that we would listen and respond promptly and equitably. We soon learned that they were experiencing a lot of harm, both on campus and in their homes. Some did not even have homes to return to once they came out. In 2015, while still under pressure from conservative board members, the university administration found itself at odds with LGBTQ students over their plan to raise funds for homeless LGBTQ youth. The two parties could not agree on a receiving organization for the funds. The students went directly to the press with their side of the story and promptly raised over $17,000 on a crowdfunding site. The university, in turn, was characterized by national news outlets as unwilling to help homeless youth because they were gay. Unfortunate as this incident was, it did spark a lot of soul searching on the part of the university. A team of professors initiated a study of over 300 Adventist LGBTQ youth, ages 18 to 35. It was one of the most extensive studies conducted by any single Christian denomination. Their findings showed generally low levels of support and acceptance in Adventist home churches, along with elevated rates of depression and at-risk thoughts and behaviors. Although a high proportion of respondents retained a strong spiritual commitment, many struggled to maintain ties with their Adventist congregations. Here are a few highlights from that study. Researchers found that most respondents 85%, did not feel comfortable coming out to their parents. Many were scared that their family would think of them as sinful or disgusting. Over half were afraid of being disowned by their parents. 7 out of 10 said their parents were disappointed when they came out to them. And nearly 1 in 10 were kicked out of their house after they came out. According to respondents, many of their parents, 82%, struggled to accept their sexual orientation or gender identity. 4 out of 10 were ridiculed for the way they dressed or fixed their hair. Over 1/3 were recipients of demeaning language by family members. Nearly 1/3 said their parents' financial support depended on them complying with their parents' wishes about their sexuality or gender identity. And religion, as you might suspect, played a pivotal role in how parents and their LGBTQ children viewed and responded to human sexuality issues. Religious beliefs triggered feelings of guilt and shame in 3/4 of the respondents. Most reported that their parents' religious beliefs made it difficult for their parents to accept them. Many parents prayed that God would change their children's orientation or identity, with over half using scripture to talk their children into being straight. And 1/4 of them took their child to a pastor for a prayer and counseling to change their child's orientation or identity. The most common source of social support for Adventist LGBT young people came from friends. 2/3 that they agreed that they had a friend who cared about them and was there for them. By contrast, less than 1/3 agreed that their family was there to help or emotionally support them. And significantly, even fewer saw clergy, only 12%, or religious congregations, 9%, as important sources of social support. These findings suggested a critical need for Adventist families, schools, and congregations to change their approach toward LGBTQ young people. Since that time, and consequently, the university has established an official group on campus for LGBTQ students, which provides a confidential and caring space where they can discuss matters of importance to them and receive the support of their peers and the faculty sponsors. This group, known as Haven, meets every other week with an average of 20 in attendance. It does not attempt to change anyone's sexual orientation or gender identity, or even convince them of the denomination's position on human sexuality. It is simply a safe space to be and to grow as a human being. A number of us at Andrews University are hoping to write a new chapter in our relationship with LGBTQ students. We are not in a position to change the Adventist doctrinal position on marriage and sexuality, but we can create what one LGBTQ advocate calls a posture shift. This change entails adjusting our actions, our attitudes, and language to avoid harming those whose sexual orientation or gender identity differs from our own. Over the years, we regrettably have not done the necessary work to understand and educate ourselves on the experiences of LGBTQ young people. And because of this, we have to acknowledge that we have harmed far too many in that community. But now that we have the evidence in front of us, we hope to avoid past mistakes and prevent further mistreatment and exclusion. This summer, we are working on a plan to educate our campus with an evidence-based approach to understanding and responding well to the experience of our LGBTQ students. The Apostle Paul ends his letter to the Romans with an appeal for believers to love and support one another, even amid their differences. Like Jesus, Paul says that the essence of Scripture is to love your neighbor. Love does no harm to a neighbor Paul says. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. If Christian colleges and universities could calibrate their approach to LGBTQ students with just one biblical idea, I think it should be this one: love does no harm. Noted Holocaust survivor and professor Elie Wiesel wrestled with his students about the ethical interpretation of Scripture. He said the ancient rabbis taught that the Torah itself can either be an elixir of life or a poison, depending on how it is used. Wiesel insisted that Scripture be read with courage and compassion. He said, if even the most authoritative teaching, the most sacred text, leads to dehumanization, to humiliation, to harm, then we must reject it. Wiesel's teaching assistant said of Wiesel's approach, our role in reading sacred Scripture is to ask two questions. What does the text say? And who may be harmed by this text? From this perspective, attending both to the text and its ethical implications is essential to the moral handling of Scripture. David Gushee, a leading evangelical ethicist, has some advice for leaders of Christian universities. He explains that there will be two voices in their ears, one loud and one quieter. The loud voice will come from the Christian culture warriors, defenders of so-called biblical orthodoxy, who have the power to raise a ruckus against any college that dares venture in the direction of mercy and justice toward LGBTQ students. The quieter voice, he says, will come from the lawyers offering to defend your religious freedoms against liberals who would force you to stop discriminating against LGBTQ students. But here is my plea to trustees and other leaders of Christian universities, writes Gushee. Focus on student well-being. Focus on the vulnerable young people who you are educating. The Christian culture warriors may be screaming in one ear and the religious liberty lawyers may be whispering in the other. Find a third ear, or maybe a heart that can feel the pain of some of your own most vulnerable charges. At one time, we knew little of their distress, but that time has passed, he says. It's about the kids. Hear the cries of your own oppressed. Stop harming them. I could not agree more with Gushee. Over the last 2 decades, I have heard both of those voices. I have also heard and distinctly felt the pain and anguish of that third voice. It is constantly ringing in my ears to the point where I can listen to nothing else. For me, my obligation as a student life professional in a Christian university, even a conservative one, has come down to this: love does no harm. Love is kind. Love does not dishonor others. Love always protects, always perseveres. Love never fails, not even one of our LGBTQ students. If I can live by that law, the law of love, I feel that I will have met my God-given responsibility. Thank you for entertaining my thoughts today.
Thank you, Steve. Like I've told you before, I wish you were there back when I was, but of course you were probably in grade school. But anyway, thank you. Thank you again. Now Dorothy Long will extinguish our chalice.
Dorothy, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Never has it been more true than now. We extinguish the flame, but the sparks within us remain alight. From each of us in our supposed solitude The signals buzz and hum, sparkling through space one to another, connecting us invisibly but palpably. We are one, and from every window, our light shines. These words from Reverend Amy Zucker Morgenstern, UU Church in Palo Alto, California.
Thank you, Dorothy. After our musical benediction, I'd like to invite everyone to join us in our breakout rooms. There'll be breakout rooms, a few people, and then after a few minutes, we will go into our main circle talk. Anyone who wishes, I will remain in the main room as well as Stevie Yeagley. And anyone who just wants to remain in the main room doesn't have to click on the breakout rooms, but we will all be together for circle talk. So we'll go on to our musical benediction.